It was just past midnight when I got the ping. I'd been driving for hours, the streets of the city slick with rain, the glow of streetlights reflecting off the pavement like streaks of gold. My car was warm, the hum of the engine a steady companion, but I was tired. My eyes felt heavy, my shoulders stiff from hours behind the wheel. Still, I couldn't afford to call it a night, not yet. Bills don't pay themselves, and the rent was due in a week. So, when the notification popped up on my phone, I didn't hesitate. I tapped the screen and accepted the ride. The pickup location was a few miles away, in a part of the city I didn't know well. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind with rows of old, narrow houses and overgrown trees that cast long shadows across the road. The GPS led me to a dimly lit street, the houses dark and silent, their windows like empty eyes staring out into the night. I pulled up to the curb and checked the app. The passenger's name was Evelyn. No profile picture, just a blank silhouette. I shrugged it off. Not everyone bothered to upload one. I waited. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the kind that misted the windshield and made the world feel hazy, like I was looking at it through a veil. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No sign of Evelyn. I was about to cancel the ride and move on when I saw her. She appeared out of nowhere, standing under the glow of a streetlight a few feet from my car. I hadn't seen her approach, hadn't heard footsteps or the creak of a door. One moment the street was empty, and the next she was there, her figure slight and pale, her dark hair clinging to her face in the damp air. She was wearing a long coat, the kind that looked too heavy for the weather, and she carried no bag, no umbrella. Just her, standing perfectly still, staring at my car. I rolled down the window. "Evelyn?" I called out. She didn't respond. She just stood there, her eyes fixed on me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if this was even the right person. But then she stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was gliding rather than walking. She opened the back door and slid into the seat behind me without a word. Hi," I said, trying to sound friendly despite the oddness of the situation. "Where are we headed?" She didn't answer right away. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her sitting perfectly straight, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the back of my seat. Her face was pale, almost unnaturally so, and her eyes were dark, almost black in the dim light. There was something off about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was the way she didn't blink, or the way she seemed to radiate a coldness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried an edge that made me shiver. "Take me to Willow Creek Road," she said. I nodded and entered the address into the GPS. Willow Creek Road was on the outskirts of the city, a winding stretch of road that cut through dense woods. I'd never been there before, but the app estimated it would take about 20 minutes to get there. I pulled away from the curb, the tires splashing through puddles as I drove. The silence in the car was oppressive. I tried to make small talk, asking Evelyn if she'd had a long day or if she lived in the area, but she didn't respond. She just sat there, staring straight ahead, her expression blank. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror again and caught her looking at me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I felt a jolt of fear, like she could see straight through me, like she knew something I didn't. I focused on the road, trying to shake the feeling. The rain picked up again, the wipers swishing back and forth in a steady rhythm. The streets were empty, the city quiet except for the sound of the engine and the patter of rain on the roof. I turned onto the highway, the lights of the city fading behind us as we headed toward the outskirts. That's when I noticed something strange. The GPS had stopped working. The screen was frozen, the little arrow that represented my car stuck in place. I tapped the screen, but nothing happened. I glanced at my phone, but the app had crashed, the map replaced by a spinning loading icon. I frowned, my unease growing. I'd never had issues with the app before, and my phone was fully charged. What was going on? Evelyn, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you know the way to Willow Creek Road? My GPS isn't working. She didn't answer. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her staring out the window, her face expressionless. The rain streaked the glass, distorting the world outside into a blur of shadows and light. I swallowed hard and kept driving, hoping I was heading in the right direction. The further we went, the more the road seemed to change. The streetlights became fewer and farther between, their glow weak and flickering. The trees grew thicker, their branches arching over the road like skeletal fingers. The air felt heavier, colder, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. And then I saw it, a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a man, his clothes soaked from the rain, his face pale and gaunt. He was waving at me, his movements frantic, like he was trying to flag me down. I slowed the car, my instincts telling me to stop, but something held me back. There was something wrong about him, something that made my skin crawl. I glanced in the rearview mirror, about to ask Evelyn if she'd seen him, but she was gone. The back seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop on the wet pavement. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I turned around, my eyes scanning the back seat, but there was no one there. Evelyn was gone, vanished. I looked out the window, but the man by the side of the road was gone too. The street was empty, the rain falling in sheets, the only sound the ticking of the engine as it cooled. I don't know how long I sat there, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined her? Had she jumped out of the car without me noticing? None of it made sense. I grabbed my phone, my hand shaking, and opened the Rideshare app. The ride was still active, the timer ticking away, but the passenger's name was gone. The screen was blank, like the ride had never been booked in the first place. I drove home in a daze, the events of the night replaying in my mind over and over. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I was exhausted, my body and mind drained. I stumbled into the house, locked the door behind me, and collapsed onto the couch. I told myself it was just a bad night, a trick of the mind brought on by fatigue and stress. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true, because the next night I got another ping. The pickup location was the same. The passenger's name was Evelyn, and this time when I arrived, she was already waiting for me, standing under the same streetlight, her dark eyes fixed on mine. I didn't pick her up. I couldn't. I canceled the ride and drove away as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. But I know she's still out there, waiting. And I know, deep down, that she'll find me again, because Evelyn isn't real. And yet, she is, and she's not done with me yet. The story doesn't end there. A few days after that second encounter, I started noticing things. Small things, at first. My car would smell faintly of damp earth, even though I hadn't driven in the rain. The temperature inside would drop suddenly, making my breath visible in the air. And then there were the sounds, soft whispers when I was alone, the faint creak of the back seat shifting, like someone was sitting there. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was all in my head. But the more I tried to push it away, the more it seemed to follow me. I'd catch glimpses of her in the rearview mirror, her pale face staring back at me, her dark eyes unblinking. I'd turn around, and she'd be gone, but the feeling of her presence lingered, like a cold hand on the back of my neck. One night, I decided to confront it. I drove back to the street where I'd first picked her up, the street with the old houses and the overgrown trees. The streetlight was still there, its glow weak and flickering, casting long shadows across the pavement. I parked my car and got out, the rain soaking through my clothes as I stood there, staring at the spot where she'd appeared. "Evelyn," I called out, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" There was no answer, just the sound of the rain and the wind rustling through the trees. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for anything to happen, But the street was empty, the houses dark and silent, their windows like empty eyes staring out into the night. I was about to give up and leave when I heard it, a soft, guttural laugh, coming from behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding, but there was no one there, just the empty street, the rain falling in sheets, the wind howling through the trees. And then I saw her. She was standing under the streetlight, her pale face glowing in the dim light, her dark eyes fixed on mine. She was smiling that same unnatural smile, her lips curled back to reveal teeth that were too sharp, too white. She took a step toward me, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was savoring every moment. I stumbled back, my legs giving out beneath me as I fell to the ground. She kept coming, her smile widening, her eyes never leaving mine. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but I was frozen, trapped in her gaze. And then she was gone. One moment she was there, standing over me, her face inches from mine, and the next she was gone, vanished into the night. I sat there, my heart pounding, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps, until the rain washed away the last traces of her presence. I don't know what she is, or what she wants from me, but I know she's still out there, waiting. And I know deep down that she'll find me again, because Evelyn isn't real, and yet she is, and she's not done with me yet. The final chapter of this nightmare came a week later. I was driving home from a late shift, the streets empty, the city quiet except for the sound of the engine and the occasional splash of tires through puddles. I was exhausted, my mind numb from hours of driving, when I saw her. She was standing in the middle of the road, her pale face glowing in the headlights, her dark eyes fixed on mine. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just inches from her. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling on the steering wheel as I stared at her, unable to move, unable to breathe. And then she smiled. It was the same smile I'd seen before, wide and unnatural, filled with something I couldn't quite place. She stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate, until she was standing right in front of the car. She raised her hand and placed it on the hood, her fingers curling around the edge like she was holding on. And then she was gone. I don't know how long I sat there, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But when I finally looked down, I saw it, a handprint on the hood of the car, etched into the metal like it had been burned there. I reached out to touch it, my fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface, and I felt a jolt of fear, like I'd been marked, like she claimed me. I don't drive anymore. I can't. Every time I get behind the wheel, I feel her presence, cold and heavy, like she's sitting in the back seat, watching me. I've tried to sell the car, to get rid of it, but no one will take it. They say there's something wrong with it, something they can't quite explain. And I know, deep down, that she's still out there waiting, because Evelyn isn't real. And yet she is, and she's not done with me yet.